Welcome to the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom podcast with Jacob Ayers, providing actionable content to help you along your journey to financial freedom through real estate investing. As the premier asset class, real estate has helped ordinary people just like you amass fortunes. The benefits of passive income from real estate investing will allow you to live a life you want. And now your host, entrepreneur, real estate investor, and apartment deal syndicator, Jacob Ayers.
Hi, and welcome to the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom podcast, episode 99. Hey, I'm your host, Jacob Ayers. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode. Today, our guest is Scott Hollister. Scott is a former teacher in small rural town Connecticut. His real estate interests started after reading a few books on real estate investing. Scott graduated with student debt and didn't like the thought of paying back this debt over the next 20 years. He knew he could overcome and offset his decision to borrow money for college by educating himself and sticking to sound investing principles. Since leaving teaching, investing in real estate has become Scott's full-time passion. In today's conversation with Scott, we touch on several points, including using rental income to qualify for a loan, buying REO properties with hard money loans, investing in your education, and building and scaling a portfolio starting from nothing. Without further ado, let's jump into it. All right, today I welcome on the show Mr. Scott Hollister. Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Jacob. How's it going?
Hey, we're doing so well, Scott. Well, hey, thanks for coming on the show. We really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no, super excited to be on. First podcast interview, so it's pretty big deal for me.
Well, let's get after it then.
Yeah.
Hey, Scott, could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, how you got started investing in real estate, and just a tad bit about your background?
Yeah, so born and raised in Connecticut. I grew up wanted to be a teacher, so went to school, graduated college 2012 with the teaching degree. Started teaching, bought my first property 2012, single family home. And from there, just been investing in single family homes, mostly the BRRRR strategy, as it's called on Bigger Pockets. Did one flip, and now full-time into multifamily investing.
Yeah, that's awesome, Scott. Well, that first property you bought straight out of graduating from college, were you intending for that to be an investment, or did you kind of get into this thing accidentally?
Yeah, I mean, right off from the gate, I knew I wanted to be financially secure. So to backtrack a little bit, 2011, my parents lost their home. So I was living with them at the time, and that kind of left a sour taste in my mouth. Not really because I was upset about, losing a child at home. It was more of upset about, not being able to help them at the time. So we ended up renting for a year and a half. And then with my first paycheck, I literally went down to the bank and I'm like, how much can I afford? And I knew I wanted to do, I didn't know Bigger Pockets at the time, but the house hack term was exactly what I did. I read one real estate book and I thought it was just, hey, if rent can cover just the principal, interest, taxes, insurance, I was like, I'm doing all right. So I looked around and then found one property that was pretty unique. It had 2 single family homes on one lot. I could only qualify for about $175,000 at the time. And this was a purchase price of $245,000. So I was able to purchase more, as counting the rental income. So, I rented out the big house and rehabbed the little house. It was 2-bed, 1 bath, got a roommate, and technically lived for free, while I managed the property. So.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Scott, for the audience members that might not be aware of how you can use credit for the rental income, would you run over that really quickly?
Yeah. So I did FHA 3.5% down. They're able to use 75% of the income to count towards the purchase price. So I believe the market rent was $1,500. So they're able to add back 75% of that to my monthly income to boost, my purchase power.
Yeah, right. Awesome. So you're looking at the bank's looking at you and saying, well, Scott, you qualify with your income for $175,000 worth of property. But if you buy a rental property with additional income, you can use 75% of that additional income towards your balance statement. So it allowed you to qualify for a higher amount and get into this property, right?
Definitely. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Scott, so are you focusing on single family homes still? What are you working on in terms of real estate these days?
Single family, I got to a point where I was being too aggressive with my tax returns on rentals, and I could no longer get agency debt. So that's the Fannie Freddie long-term 30-year fixed, low interest. And I was getting priced out of Connecticut pretty quickly as it got more popular over the years. I could typically get a foreclosure for around $100,000, $110,000, a 3-bed, 1-bath. BA area, with the after repair value of like 185 to 200. And as you know, Connecticut taxes, when you do a commercial product like the debt service coverage ratio, it automatically kills the deal. So, I can no longer, find success with the single family rentals long term. And I think I got to a point, I started reading some commercial real estate and multifamily. It just made a lot of sense in terms of, scaling and being able to get that passive monthly income.
Yeah, Scott. Well, so many people have different paths to how they end up in multifamily, that is. Some people buy hundreds or even thousands of homes, like our buddy Rod Cleef down in Florida. He's bought thousands of single family homes and realized he was just beating himself over the head building this monster of a business before the light bulb switched and he started buying multifamily. So luckily for you, you didn't have to go through that much headache before you kind of saw that light bulb go off. But yeah, so everybody's got their different paths they take, along real estate, starting at single families, maybe dabbling in duplexes or triplexes. And then, you kind of see that progression and it kind of changes amongst everybody, but really cool. Well, one thing you mentioned that I think is interesting, and it's a fine line, is being too aggressive on your tax returns, right? Because as real estate investors, we're very blessed with being able to take a lot of deductions, and that's good for that year. But as you find when you go and try to take out a loan from a lender, they look at your tax returns and they think, well, this guy didn't make very much money last year. Even though you did, you just had a lot of deductions. So how'd you handle that fine line there?
It's interesting. So I'm trying to not get too in the weeds of it,
sure,
but
yeah. I know neither of us are CPAs, so probably for the audience members out there, look up Tom Wheelwright or your local CPA for somebody like this. But yeah, I just would like to hear your take.
Yeah, no, exactly. I got to a point. So I bought a foreclosure. I have a construction back, so I've done all my rehabs to date by myself. And then the one flip I did with two of my friends, and we partnered on it. And what happened was I bought a foreclosure with hard money, so short-term interest only at 12%. And I did the burst strategy on that one. So I rehabbed it in 11 and a half days, mostly lipstick by myself, working around the clock.
11 and a half days.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the one thing.
Wow.
Yeah. Cruising, man.
Yeah.
Yep. And I posted that on Bigger Pockets with pictures and the whole story and the process. But yeah, that's the one thing my father taught me was, work ethic. So I think, just attacking something relentlessly until it's finished is one of my strong suits. But, as I found out, you can only be at one house at one time. So that can only go so far. And to go back to the tax returns, so I had this property through hard money, and it was due in 12 months. So you have, it's very short term. And in Connecticut, and other areas as well, there's a year seasoning where the bank likes to see a property, season. Yep. So I had that hiccup. So once I got to a certain point, my debt to income was too high because, I think it was at 50, 55%, and they required to be 45%. So I either had, I had to sell the property, get an extension on the hard money, which, paying more points and more interest, and the deal didn't cash flow, but it carried itself but it was the longest process. And I think that's the biggest thing that's not talked about with the burst strategy is the exit strategies. And it's really important to sit down and know, what the financing you're going to get and if you can qualify. So I had to do some creative process.
Yeah, and that seasoning period is really important thing for people to understand. And it's a little bit different for every lender. But like you said, some lenders might require you to hold this property for a year, whereas you thought your exit strategy might be in 11 and a half days on your instance, or, maybe more realistically 4 to 6 months or something like that. So yeah, that's something to be aware of going into this burst strategy that you don't hear a lot about. So yeah, you just learning things as you go. And like you said, getting into the weeds of it, you learn different things. So yeah, really cool stuff. So definitely. You bought your very first property because you really knew that you wanted, financial independence, and it was really near and dear to your heart at the time. So you buy this first property, you realize, hey, this thing is paying. You were doing a house hack, that is. So you realize this thing is paying for the principal, interest, taxes, insurance, all of that. And you kind of started to gain a little traction and do it again. So, what did your mindset look like going into your second deal? What was your goal then?
So I took a 1 to 2 year hiatus after that first property. And then I have to give 100% credit to Bigger Pockets. I really think I have an associate's degree in real estate investing from their podcast. So I devoured, and it was a funny story. My first post on there kind of gives the background of, how Bigger Pockets came back to me. The short of it is I got a little Honda Civic, for gas mileage. So I was commuting too really far for a teacher, and it was such an old Civic that it didn't have a radio. So I had to listen to something. So naturally, I gravitated towards the podcast, and I'd listen to it. It was a half hour one way, half hour back. So I'd kill a podcast a day, and I just started thinking creatively, and that kind of got me to the next point where a fellow teacher, PE teacher, that we kind of knew each other, and he reached out after I wrote my first post, and he's like, hey, would you be interested to going to a first meetup if we kind of, got some people together? And I said, yeah, of course. And that, I think, was one of the biggest things that helped me, was to find a local group and really be involved. And that has just exploded. So from there, it was, just creative. And then I teamed up with a REO friendly agent who we just looked at REOs. And since my mother's been in the lending business for 30 years, in the last 6, she's been in the hard money lending business. So I was able, through the right connections, kind of line up the financing that way. And then that brought me to my next REO purchase.
Yeah, Scott, for the audience members that might not be familiar with that term, can you describe what an REO is?
Yep. Real estate owned, typically a bank foreclosure. When someone couldn't make the mortgage payments, they foreclosed on them and bought the asset back under their portfolio.
Yeah. Okay. And this is how you're acquiring many of your properties, since most of them have been foreclosures.
Yes.
So could you talk a little bit about the process of how that works in your particular market? Because foreclosures are different in even in different states and municipalities and even different cities. Sometimes you have to go down to the courthouse and, you bid on it as an auction and it goes at market value and you have to pay all cash without seeing the property. Others are a little different. So how does it work in your local market, and how are you making it work?
Yeah, over the last 2 years, it has changed drastically. When I started doing it, 14, 15, 16, I was able to get MLS foreclosures pretty easily. And it was typically, in order to have a strong enough offer, it was a cash offer. And at the time, you could use hard money as a cash offer. Now brokers are getting a little bit more wise to that, to clarify it. Typically no contingencies. So that means you're taking it as is, no matter what's wrong with the property, and no inspection contingencies, no well or septic if you're in a rural area. My first couple I did with a 10-day window inspection. That way, just in case the property, we have this huge epidemic going on in Connecticut. It's foundation damage. And
okay.
It costs around about $150,000 for, a normal size foundation. But it's wow. Really bad. Yeah. So, you could go under really quickly, just one bad deal. So it's it's taking a house as is for one of your first properties is kind of dangerous. So that's kind of why I stuck with that 10-day window where I could bring in, a contractor or someone who's done it before. And right there, that's worth your comfort and peace of mind. So.
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of understanding those risks up front. I mean, with the REO properties, you have some inherent risk. Like you say, maybe you don't have an inspection period or no contingencies to back out of the contract. Just understanding those and realizing how to mitigate some of those strategies. So like you say, you put in a 10-day inspection window in some of your purchases. So, what's working for you now, and how have you mitigated those strategies if you're no longer able to use that inspection window?
Yeah. So, so last year I sold the flip. And as we were doing the flip, all the construction work ourselves, there was a friend at the local BP meetup. He's like, "Hey, why don't you get your license?" And I'm like, I don't really want to, you hear it most on Bigger Pockets. Is it worth it? Is it not worth it? Well,
yeah.
Yeah. I kept going back and forth. And there was this Groupon for $160 in Massachusetts, 2 weekends, 40 hours. You can get your course, and then it's reciprocal in Connecticut. So once you got Massachusetts, they give you your Connecticut license, with some paperwork and some more fees. But I was like, I'll just get it for, the education. And we were flipping a house, and I was like, I might as well be the agent and get the commission so I could pay for, the costs associated, which were around $2,000, $2,500. So I got that. So fast forward to today, I no longer look at single family properties. And I represent a few of my friends who are flippers and some family as an agent, mostly value add deals. But every offer that we're doing today is all cash, no contingencies, and we're still getting beat out just because I think, flipping has gotten pretty popular mainstream, and I think people are overpaying. So it's kind of putting us at a standstill. I think that's important to know, to stick to your numbers, whatever they are, and not, get emotional just to get a property.
Yeah, that's such an important point you make there, Scott. And one thing I like to remind myself is it's better to buy no deal than it is a bad deal. I myself am very nervous about buying a bad deal. So, I just will stick away, like you say, just stick to your numbers, and you have to have something that you're going off of. So yeah, just remember that.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, Scott, you have a unique background. That is, you come to real estate as an educator. So, you've got this education piece that's really important to you. And I want to talk about how it's helped you to this point. You've spent a lot of time, like you said, just consuming Bigger Pockets podcast, which if you were starting out brand new, I'm pretty sure you could listen to Bigger Pockets podcast for like 6 days straight. Oh man, that's probably even a way wrong estimate, maybe 6 months straight. There's just hundreds of hours of content. And then you've gone to all these meetups. You ventured out and got your real estate license. So that's really helping you out in your business. And then you are always going to different seminars, looking at different mentors. So could you speak to that kind of portion of your education in this whole picture?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the biggest turning point in my, last year of this multifamily process was, so I left my teaching job full time. I'm moving into real estate investing full time, but I don't have enough passive income to replace my teaching salary just yet. So it's a lot of grinding, but I knew, if I did 1 deal, 2 deals a year, I could replace that pretty easily through flipping and the BRRRR strategy. So I knew I was pretty confident, and now I have another source of income as an agent. So, the more sources of income, the quote unquote safer I feel. So, I had all this time, being able to be anywhere in the country. So I once heard these guys on the Bigger Pockets podcast about multifamily investing. And I remember the story of like, later on, we're going to chop up a tree with a chainsaw. And I just remembered that, but I didn't know who they were. And I ended up picking up their book, Wheel Profits by Jake and Gino. Amazing guys. I truly believe in them. I think they're really there to help people, and they have a great story. So I read the book. It got me, motivated again through multifamily investing. And they had an event in Tennessee. So I was like, you know what? I might as well go. And ended up going, and that like catapulted, this passion and trying to, really understand multifamily investing. And then from there, I met a gentleman. He's like, you know what? I was like, are you going to any more events? Like after it, you're just jazzed up. You love
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sign me up for everything.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, yeah, I'm actually going to this one in Tampa, Rod Cleve. I'm like, actually, my mom just moved down to Tampa last year. So it was like another couple $100. I was like, yep, might as well go. And then it just started like picking up and gaining speed from there. And not only like, I think it's important to ask yourself, do the events cost money? I would say each trip costs about $700-800 with ticket, food, airline travel, and hotels. But the relationships and the information I learned is like bar none. You can't even put a price on it. And it grew from there. So, I think if I could give any advice to someone who's trying to go full time in the multifamily, it's kind of reach out and be surrounded by the people that are already doing it. So.
Yeah. I think you have a unique perspective here on this, Scott, and you're coupling both this education piece with actually doing it. And there are people who do one or the other or not either at all. Maybe there's these people that kind of get caught in this analysis paralysis phase where they're going to these seminars and have mentors and analyzing a bunch of deals, but they don't ever pull the trigger on anything. And you've got these people on the other end of the spectrum who are haphazardly buying flips because they watched an episode of HGTV one day and, are outbidding you in Connecticut, but they have no education on it. So you've got a pretty unique balance there between the education piece and the actual doing piece. So yeah, really good stuff there.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, Scott, can you tell us a little bit about what you've got going on now? What's on your plate as you're making this transition from buying foreclosure single-family homes to trying to turn the corner and get involved in more larger multifamily deals? What's on the agenda? What's on your plate these days?
So now I feel pretty confident, and I can only speak on what I've done. So I haven't invested in a multifamily property yet, so I can't really speak about the purchase and owning and maintaining a property. But I feel confident in underwriting deals, looking at deals. I've written probably 10 to 15 LOIs over the last 3 to 6 months of this process. I underwrite very conservatively because I've gotten some great advice, from people that have gone, to places where I've gone where, the first one has to be a grand slam, because not only am I betting on, my reputation and putting, what very little funds I have, but I'm also borrowing other people's, savings and I have to do right by them. So I think it's a tough process. I think I'm underwriting too conservatively, but I'd rather do that for the first one and be patient and get the right deal. So,
yeah. And that instills a lot of confidence with your future partners too, right? I mean, you are out there, pounding the pavement, looking for deals, writing LOIs, letters of intent, and, trying to make things happen, but not too aggressively and not outside of, your parameters where you want to be. So yeah, really kudos to you there. It kind of goes back to like we were talking about, not buying a bad deal just for the sake of buying a deal, right? So yeah. Well, Scott, you've got a few deals under your belt now, and, flipping business isn't easy. So, sometimes there are ups and downs in that. Sounds like you crush it with 11.5-day renovations, which still blows my mind. But can we talk a little bit about some of your best and worst deals? Do you have maybe a case example of one of each?
Yeah. I think, I don't necessarily have a worse deal. I have, learning experiences from them. I think the bird strategy. So that was 11.5-day rehab, basically cosmetic stuff. I redid a whole kitchen, sanded, refinished the floors, painted, did the trim, removed popcorn ceilings. The only thing I hired out was a pool removal, replaced the rock wall, did some outside stuff, trimming, but that was, I felt pretty confident. The rehab was around 10 or 11 grand out of pocket costs. So I could see the end product, and I've done those other two previous houses. One was a light turn, then one was a little bit heavier rehab, but still mostly cosmetic. And then from there, as I was getting the tenant in, I thought I screened them really well. I have a pretty good judge of character. And at the end, there were some missed payments past the 10th, and I didn't follow through on what I said I was going to do, like a notice to serve or notice to quit. And
Right.
so I kind of let it go past just because I'm a nice guy when it comes down to that, but nice guy and treating something as a business is totally different. So, I learned some lessons that way. I didn't have to evict the tenant. But it definitely caused some sleepless nights when I have to make, a $1,000 hard money loan per month. So,
yeah, definitely. So,
yeah. So from that one, I invested in this flip. This was 100% private equity from my mother's friend, from my friend's mother. And it was a partner, my cousin Ryan and friend Jake. And it was 163,000 all in we raised, and we just rehabbed it. I was teaching at the time, so I could only be there during the night and the weekends, but that was a total gut job. We did everything, floor to ceiling, and we turned it in 9 months. Our financing let us be comfortable. Just to give you terms, the first hard money loan was 12%, 3 points. This one was 10% fixed, no points. So, whether we got out in 6 months or 12 months, our investor was going to get 10% fixed, which worked for my advantage because I didn't have to put any capital in the deal. So,
yeah, okay. Well, Scott, that brings up another good point I'd like to touch on here. So you're doing one of these flips at the point when you still have a full-time job and you've got a commitment all day long. So what was that like? You got your day job as a teacher. You've got to be there morning through late afternoon, and then you're doing this on the side. So I'm sure that was really difficult. Luckily, you had partners to help, I'm sure, pull their weight. But could you talk a little bit about how you managed your time during that kind of phase?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was some long weekend days, a few times. I think it was stressful. It was a little bit more stressful than, so I'll give you the end product and then you could tell me if it was worth it. So,
I like it.
Yeah. So we ended up making a profit of $23,000, and like $261. And that was split 3 ways. And there were some expenses on my end, but so basically we walked with about, $700-800 each. And that took about 11 months from buy to sell. It was worth it in a certain extent, but if you do the hourly rate out, which one of my partners did, it ended up being about $20 an hour, $20 an hour, which is fine. I mean, we had fun. I mean, these are some of my best friends, and we're just having fun and hanging out together and rehabbing a property. It's a good time. So you kind of have to weigh both sides of the question. Would I do it now? Absolutely not. But it added credibility to my belt. I borrowed private capital for the first time, which, proven record, that helps. I was able to be an agent, so I got to learn the process in that. So all in all, it was a very positive experience, and it was the best thing I could do at the time. So.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that was your first deal. It's not like you guys are going into this thinking you're going to retire off of this one flip, right? So as long as, stay in the green, it turns out okay. You guys gain some experience, put some money in your pockets. It all works out at the end of the day. So whether you make 20 or 40 or 60,000 is almost irrelevant to you at this point.
Yeah. Well, here's the other caveat. So that was purchased for 110, sold for 195. The Burr I did 6 months prior. So I purchased that for 101, and it had an ARV of 185. I still hold this day as a rental. Well, I moved into it to get financing. So that's a different story. But so I was able to pull out $148,000. I was into it for about 118. So I got a check for over $40,000 at closing, tax free, for
awesome.
for 11 and a half day rehab. So when you do the Burr strategy right, it's a game changer. And from that, I actually borrowed 100% because I took a home equity line of credit on my first 2 houses to pay for the down payment on the hard money. So it was 100% $0 out of my pocket. And then I was able to keep 26,000 and some change while keeping the house. So,
yeah. And just to recap, for maybe the listeners that aren't familiar with that BRRRR strategy, it's kind of like Bigger Pockets Bible, right? So BRRRR is, BRRRR. How many R's? I don't know. But it's buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. Do I have that correct?
Yeah. So, basically the easy process is, buy it at a real deep discount value, let's say 50% ARV, and then hopefully stay under that 75, 80% so you can pull. It's so hard to explain. I'm going to butcher it, but basically when I bought the property, I didn't understand the BRRRR strategy. But when you see the possibility of forcing appreciation, that's basically what you're doing. It's a light bulb goes off in your head. And I think it's the best strategy when you're young and you don't have capital, so you can create that wealth very rapidly.
Yeah, definitely so. And you can take that money you're talking about that you got during your refinance and roll that into another property. And it really helps develop some capital all of a sudden, where you got into your first deal for very little down. And now you have that property and a good chunk of change in your pocket to go do the next deal, and then the next one, and then the next one. So yeah, It's a really good strategy to snowball and kind of build your portfolio from the ground up.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so popular with Bigger Pockets, because it works for a lot of people, and you can kind of do it over time. So yeah, really good stuff there.
Yep. And at that point, so just to give you some background, when I was buying the REO, I had about $5,000 to my name. I was going through the process of getting a home equity line of credit, and this is another light bulb. I did FHA, so I only had probably $30,000 of equity. I was able to pull $21,000 out because they go up to 100% of the value of the home. So I didn't have the approval yet, but I knew this house was a grand slam. So I took out of that $5,000, I took $3,000 as its down payment. As I shoved my chips all in, before even getting the HELOC. Got the HELOC, leveraged all that capital, just to squeeze by. But on the backside, now I have an extra $26,000 added to my net worth, and now I put that in the business account. It helps me sleep a little bit better at night too. It's before it's kind of living paycheck to paycheck, or having only a couple months reserves is kind of dangerous.
Now you've got some breathing room.
Yeah. So I think if I was going to tell my young self again, I would probably just say, hey, don't count on the rental income and just act like that's your mortgage payment and bank all that money. So.
Oh yeah. So, and it grows pretty quickly too, as you're realizing after you do your first several deals, it starts to become substantial. That very first property, if you're cash flowing $200 a month, well, that's really not moving the needle for you. But if you keep at it and, move that capital to another deal and another, like we're talking about, snowballing into a larger portfolio, soon enough, you'll start to realize, a pretty impact to your top line at the end of every month.
Definitely. Yeah.
Well, Scott, you've been doing your deals, not alone up to this point. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about how you've built your team? You did go out and get your real estate license. So that's a vital team member that most people need to look for, but you can kind of act as your own real estate agent. But you've got hard money lenders. You've got, your regular lenders. Could you tell us a little bit about who and how you've built your team to this point?
Yeah, definitely. I think you can't do it without a team. And I think I struggled with that in the beginning of, that the growth versus scarcity mindset. I think at first I'd rather have 100% of the deals. Like that was just something like, I don't know what it was, but, just owning it yourself it was kind of my thing. But, going forward with multifamily, it's really hard. For instance, agency debt. When you're doing multifamily loans, you have to have experience. So it's kind of like what came first, chicken or egg. So in order to gain that, so you kind of have to bring someone onto the team to give up part of the deal to get that experience started. So I think, not being too greedy when it comes to the first multifamily deal and bringing on team members that have that. And one of my mentors is Joseph Goslin out of Texas, and he had this great thing he said on Jake and Gino's podcast, and it was, find someone that you know is successful and is doing something you want to do, and kind of, handcuff them to yourself. Like, so if you have a great deal, give them a chunk of it. So not only do they have a vested interest in your success, it's kind of like, a yin and yang. You're in it together, and you can kind of learn from them and grow. And I think that is well worth giving up a piece of the pie. So.
Yeah. It's better to have a piece of the pie than no pie at all at the end of the day, right? So
correct. Yeah. And other team members, brokers, insurance, the list goes on and on. And I think that's, case, state by state. Currently I'm looking in Connecticut, North Carolina, and Florida. So, each place has its, heavy hitters in it.
Yeah. Now, is there any reason you're looking at those three markets? Obviously, Connecticut's home for you. And what about your thoughts on North Carolina and Florida? Why there?
So Connecticut is proximity, but I'm getting priced out pretty quickly. Cap rates are compressing to around 5 to 6%. And if I have to, promise my investors a certain percentage, it gets really tough to make a deal work. So
sure.
I got this point, and it was kind of like a growing process. David Lindahl was kind of the first commercial real estate books I've read, along with Jake and Gino's. But if you really want to understand commercial real estate, his Commercial Real Estate Investing 101 is probably one of the better books that I've read. And from there, he has this other book called Emerging Real Estate Markets. And basically, not necessarily are you trying to shoot for that appreciation, but if you can get in the path of progress and force, appreciation as well as, the areas increasing, that's the place to be. So long story short, it's invest where it makes sense, not necessarily where you are. So when it makes sense is there a good economy? So do you see, job increase? Do you see, people moving into the state as opposed to moving out? Do you see, at least 3 major employers in the area, not one taking up the biggest share? So I think you have to ask yourself, where does it make sense to invest, and just go there. So I think I like the East Coast. It's easier for me to hop on a plane to North Carolina. 2, I have boots on the ground in Florida. My mother lives in Tampa. So those 2 are kind of in all that, justifies where I'm looking to invest.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, that all makes sense. And, everyone for the most part gets started out investing in their market, because of proximity, but soon enough realize it's important to invest where the numbers make sense and live where you want. So I think that's a really strong mantra to live by. And I do that myself. So yeah, really good stuff there.
Yep.
Well, Scott, what are your future goals?
Future goals. So the whole reason I'm doing this is for more time, with my family and my future kids that I don't have yet. Yeah,
so, I like it.
Yeah, growing up. So some background. The reason why I named my company after my dad, and he passed away young from a heart attack, and that kind of struck a chord with me in the sense that he was a high school dropout, blue collar worker. He would work for, let's say, 10, 12 years at a job, and then he'd get laid off. And then you repeat that cycle. And each time he got laid off, we kind of felt it in terms of finances and stress in the home. So, going ahead, he always pushed me to go to college. So I ended up going to college and getting a teacher salary. And, the same thing happened to me. I repeated that same process of, being stressed and, kind of living to my means, instead of living under it. So I think the future goal is, financial freedom, having the ability to not work and have enough passive income coming in monthly where, I can be at every single event my kid ever goes to. I could spend the summers with them if I wanted to. I can eventually, have my wife stay home from work if she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. I think, having those options is truly what I'm really pushing hard for.
Yeah, and that financial freedom is such an important topic, and a lot of people understand the term. They throw it out pretty loosely, but I mentioned in my most recent podcast that having financial freedom is almost like equivalent of having a superpower. You're able
Mm,
to do what you want, when you want, where you want, and that might as well be the equivalent of flying, right? So, I
yeah,
mean, yeah, it's like a superpower in my mind. So, yeah, really good stuff there.
definitely.
Well, Scott, as we're wrapping up this interview here, we've got a lightning round that we ask every one of our guests, just a series of questions we'd like to fire at you, and you just answer from the hip. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right, well, let's jump into it. The very first question we have was, what was your biggest hurdle getting started investing in real estate, and what'd you do to overcome it?
Having no credibility to be able to get, hard money financing on the REO purchase. And the way I got around it was education through Bigger Pockets, really presenting myself well when I sit down with the lender. Actually use their deal analysis. So when it prints it out, it looks very professional with the graphs and the layouts and that those are the two biggest things. Being able to talk the talk, knowing being an expert in your local market, and at first, if you have to leverage everything you have. And no one else believes in you, I think that's something you have to do to prove yourself. And then, the financing gets easier.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Scott, do you have a personal habit that contributes to your success?
Yes. I'm a firm believer in waking up early. So I wake up at 4 a.m. My background's in health, physical education. So, I love working out. I read a book a week. And I think my morning ritual it sets the day up, correctly. Compound effect, focus on your big three things each day. 12-week year, plan your year in 12-week chunks. And I think, goal planning helps the process. It creates a sense of urgency in the now when you plan backwards.
Yeah, awesome. I kind of like that method of planning your year in 12-week chunks. I don't personally do that. I just kind of have like these long-term grand vision goals, but I could see how that would be helpful by breaking those down into kind of like bite-sized, roughly 3-month chunks. So yeah, really cool. Something I might even consider myself.
Yeah, definitely. You should check out. So this is kind of where I got started on that 12-week year was Instagram. There's a gentleman by goes the name of Before 5 a.m. And he's from Australia. And he wrote this blueprint, he calls it, to success. And I ended up paying like $5 for it, but it is by far one of the best investments I ever made in terms of goal planning. And that's kind of where the 12-week year came from. And there's also a book, The 12-Week Year, which is a good read too.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we'll link that in the show notes for our audience to find. Well, Scott, maybe you just answered this question, but what online resource do you find valuable?
I definitely Bigger Pockets. I think that's my biggest resource in terms of I love the no pitch factor. So, for instance, if you go to like a local RIA, a real estate association, the Connecticut. I'm not going to badmouth anybody, but I think when people don't have when you're trying to sell someone just so you can make money, I don't believe in that. So I think, what Josh has done with, Bigger Pockets is a great thing, no pitching. And I truly believe if you help people, they'll come to you if you have services or products or whatever, and they'll trust you and they'll buy from you. But I don't believe in, pitching someone. So I think Bigger Pockets would be a great online resource.
Yeah, great. Yeah, you're so right. I mean, to build such a large audience that has that sense of community is really something special. And they've done a good job there. And I'm pretty sure myself and every guest that's been on the show at least is aware of Bigger Pockets, if not very active on there. So yeah, such a great place to, get started, find free information, just tons and tons and tons of free information. So if you're an audience member out there listening and you haven't checked out Bigger Pockets, go do it right now. Just jump on there, create a profile, dive in, and you'll be lost for potentially days. So,
yeah.
All right, enough of that. Well, Scott, what book would you recommend to the listeners and why?
Ooh, it's hard to pick just one. So I'm gonna give you the top ones that have changed my life, and this is directly from the authors that were on the Bigger Pockets podcast. Go figure. So the first one would have to be The One Thing by Jay Papasan and Gary Keller. And that's the basic premise of, focusing on the one task that is going to solve your number one goal. And it has this, guiding question, what goal, if accomplished, would make every other goal, easier to accomplish. I know I butchered it, but that's
good. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other book is just about, organizing and just necessarily getting things done. So that's the title, Getting Things Done by David Allen. And that's the stress-free productivity. And that's about organizing your life, where you live, where you work, in category, in having a thing, like an inbox, so you can kind of file and keep your life in order, so you're not stressed out. That changed my life. And there's millions of other books that I've read by now, but I think those two, I can really remember a pivot point in my life. And obviously, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's a given. So
yes.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah. So that's The One Thing. And then is that Getting Things Done, Stress-Free Productivity, one book?
Yep. The title is Getting Things Done by David Allen.
Okay. Got it.
Yep.
Got it. Awesome. Well, we'll link those books in the show notes for our audience to find if they want to pick up, and highly recommend them. Very last question we've got for you is, if you were to give advice to your 20-year-old self to get started investing in real estate, what would you tell yourself?
It'd probably be to drop out of college, go real estate investing full time, buy and hold investor, force appreciation, buy for cash flow, because if I was 20 at that time, I'd be coming up on the 06, 07 crash. And I'm kind of thankful I didn't go through that process, because I probably could have got hurt and I probably wouldn't be where I am right now. So.
Awesome. Well, bold statements there. Drop out of college. You heard it from Scott Hollister. If it doesn't go right for you, email him, call him. Scott, for all the people listening out there, it's been a great interview. You've got a great perspective on things. It's been really fun talking with you. If we want to carry on this conversation, connect with you, where can our audience members learn more about you or find you?
Yeah, just probably most active on Bigger Pockets, but I also started, a passion of mine, kind of taking after you, Jacob, is I started this thing called the Book Club Interview, where I'm taking my passion of teaching and reading a book over a week, and what I do is I reach out to the author and I try to interview them, and I record that and either post it on YouTube or as a podcast, and that is a huge step in my, growing. I've only done 2 authors to date, but I love it. It's one of my passions, and I get to talk to an author for an hour. So,
yeah, that's awesome, Scott. And I really think that's such a cool idea. You've really married a couple cool combinations there, taking your education background and then applying it to real estate investing. Not all us real estate investors have a very good, easy way to break things down, and I know you do. So I'm really interested in checking that out myself. So you're posting those on YouTube right now. So we'll link that channel to our show notes if the audience would like to go check that out. And we look forward to listening to more book reviews coming up soon. So, well, Scott, thanks so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate your time this afternoon.
Thanks, Jacob. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Take care.
All right, you too.
All right, that wraps up our interview today with Scott Hollister. To connect with Scott or for any information discussed in today's show, you can visit the show notes at www.jacobayers.com. If you liked the show, please leave a rating and review on whichever platform you're listening on. Till next time, signing off, I'm your host, Jacob Ayers.
You've been listening to the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom podcast, providing you actionable content to build your real estate empire. Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for personal advice. The opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. all investment strategies have a potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom, LLC exclusively.